We speak a little bit about, we've already touched on this a bit, but maybe another couple of stories about working in tandem with nature. Like you were saying, you notice that green shoots are coming up, so it's like, okay, pay attention to that. Or what are some other things you've noticed around the farm that you're like, that's something we should pay attention to because Mother Nature is telling us that?
Well, after the flood, it was so sad to see how a lot of trees just went down and they were gone in a second.
Yeah.
You can
And
just
this was a flood from 2013.
2013.
Okay.
All these old cottonwoods and willows along the creek here, like that was.
It
I'll
was
never forget the
right.
sound that morning. Like,
Yeah.
you just hear them falling in.
And in
like,
1 second they
Yeah.
were gone.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and we were like, why?
Right.
But then after the years go, I mean, all these little roots are gonna be cottonwoods.
Mm-hmm.
And what I realized with Mother Nature, we became the home of amazing different types of birds.
Right.
And the birds are part of this ecosystem. So it was like, okay, I guess we needed to wait for this and just welcome all these different birds.
Yeah.
And those are things that Mother Nature is telling you,
Mhm.
you know, and the birds, they play a role in the
Yeah.
ecosystems. And part of after the flood, we did a huge event for regenerate all the creek.
Uh-huh.
So the families came, we planted a lot of grass and different type of greens along the creek
Mhm.
to help with that ecosystem.
Right.
I mean, I was just looking these ducks over there, like, I mean, things like that. It's just
Yeah.
looking at Mother Nature and she's gonna tell you.
Yep.
And even the ants, and people always tell me, which kind of animals do you have at the farm?
You're like
I-
everything.
I have birds, ants, little ladybugs. People always go by, oh, cows or
Right,
sheep, you
right.
know. But I go like, we have butterflies, we have birds, we have little ants.
Yep.
All that is part of this.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for everything.
Yeah.
There's a reason. There's a reason for this tiny ladybug. We just need to respect and understand why, you
Right.
know, and let them go through their function, their cycle, and the connection with us.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that flood really changed the way I looked at farming and human relation with Mother Nature in a lot of ways too. Like, because it just left a lot of sand deposits all in this area, and like if we wouldn't done anything, first things that would come up would be probably the thistles and the goat
Right.
heads are the first things to kind of cover those spaces.
Right.
And a few years later, you get more lamb's quarter, and years later, it'd be more grass. But as farmers, like, what can we do to like speed up the system so we don't have to have a few years ago heads
Right.
in this? And so we put cover crops down, and we did clean up, and we brought in extra nutrition and just like pampered it back. And it was amazing to see like how fast it recovered. And that's
Yeah.
why we had all these birds showing up like within
Right.
2 years after the flood, because we were so quick to recover this area.
Yeah.
All these wild birds kind of found us and found
Yeah.
the farm during
They're
that
like,
time.
thank you.
Yeah.
No,
But
no,
for me, it was just eye-opening. Like, I think Mother Nature is amazing. She's going to heal herself, but with human intention, we can help her and speed things up, and that's where we're at right now. Like Ken mentioned earlier, we have this kind of shift from this extractive human mentality. Like, we're going to extract from nature, we're going to extract resources. And I really think that's the cusp of where we are as humans in the evolutionary process right now. Is we have to get out of that extractive mentality. And not just sustain what we have and stop extracting, because we're so far over the cusp that
Right.
we actually physically need to regenerate, like
Yes.
physically build new topsoil. Like, you hear sustainable agriculture, that they're not losing soil, but still, like, even the NRCS like says like sustainable is just losing a tiny percentage of soil every year. Like, no, it should be
No, we need
reversed.
to.
We have to be able to go up and forward. And so that's what really regeneration is to me, is like physically building a new thing and taking this exact opposite of that. Instead of that extractive mentality, it's like, how is us can humans working with nature actually like build a nature? And that's the only way we're going to get all the CO2 out of the atmosphere. It's the only way we're going to be able to get nutrient dense enough food to feed the population that we have. Like, it's critical to be working on this, but at the same time, family farmers, most farmers are doing it, aren't getting much support locally from governments, federally from governments. There's no subsidies available for this. There's no crop insurance available for diversified farms. And like, for the first 12 years of the farm, like, Ken and I had day jobs on the
Right.
side. Like, last summer was the first time I could actually leave my engineering job,
Right.
because we just put all the money back in the farm and the infrastructure and building out everything it needs to be like a diversified farm with all these different things, activities going on. And then I left my engineering job on a Friday, and the next Tuesday, a hailstorm just came through and like torched the stuff. It's like, oh my gosh, that's a bummer.
Right.
So we worked hard we had a bunch of young plants, tomatoes, peppers, just things we specialize in. We had a couple acres of both of those planted out. So we went back in, gave them extra nutrients to the drip system, like just got the weeds out, like pampered them back, and they got healthy again, and they started just setting tons and tons and tons of fruit, and they were looking amazing. And then like August 18th, it was like a Saturday night after a farmer's market. We're back here like 9 o'clock at night. You just hear like the storm start rolling in, and it just rolls straight in with like pea-sized hail,
Right.
but like 70-mile-per-hour winds.
Right.
Just came in sideways, and we lost like 90% of our tomatoes and peppers in 5 minutes. And like that's like a $40,000 loss for a
Right.
farm that's like barely even
Right.
paying bills. And it's like, whoa, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So you try to do the right thing, and it's just hard. That's why family farms are still going out of business, even though all the buzz and around local food. It's just hard way to make a living.
Right.
But that really taught me, like as a farmer too, I had to step back and be like, okay, our climate's changing. Like that, our cover crops in the winter aren't as good as they used to be because we're just getting pounded with dry winds all the time. We don't have the moisture, the early winter moisture like we used to help build that soil. We got to change what we do. And really, it was just asking the land, like, what can I do to protect you? And like it said, like you got to cover me up. We need some wind
Right.
protection out here.
Right.
So that's when we started working with NRCS, developing a conservation plan that's going to make a big hedgerow along the diagonal behind our farm, where to cut down some of that wind. And then even in the beef fields where we're growing veggies, we're going to be putting perennial shrubs, like in a 2-acre field, for instance, there'll be like 8 rows of native plums or gooseberries or some kind of shrub just evenly spaced out over that whole 2 acres. So you have one row that's just like a windbreak, it'll still be growing 40 feet of veggies, and then another row of gooseberries and 40 feet of veggies. So essentially you're making these like no-till
Right.
strips, pollinator habitat that are going
Yep.
to be in the field that's going to cut the wind. And if we would have had those, and when that
Yeah.
hail came last year, we could have lost maybe 50% of our
Right.
crop instead of 95.
Right.
So nature tells you what it needs,
Yeah.
and it shows you. And in this time of shifting climate, you have to be able to adapt. And that's the other thing I love about the word Ollin, is that constant motion, constant change.
Yeah.
And we
And
talk to
you're
young,
rolling with it.
exactly. And we talk with young farmers sometimes, and it's even telling them like, oh, Olin's really came to encompass like a business model too. You like you can never do the same thing you did
Yep.
last year as a farmer and expect to
Mhm.
survive. Like
Right.
every year we're launching new partnerships, launching new education programs, launching new crops. Some go away, some stay, but it's this constantly evolving thing. Like
Yeah.
you can't just have like this 3-year business plan.
Right.
It's like,
No.
this is what we're going to do this year. We have ideas of how to grow in the future, but the way nature changes, the markets change. It's just, you have to be agile. It's, which makes me love farming. I love that challenge
Yeah,
and
it's a challenge.
creativity, but it's still a hard way to make a living.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the lack of subsidies for this. And so that's, to me, a big flip in this whole thing is we've got subsidies going to conventional agriculture that supports that whole system. And then we have people trying to grow amazing nutrient-dense food, regenerating the land, pulling carbon from the air,
Right.
and you're struggling. So what do you think are some of the big ways to change that paradigm? I know kids is one, educating younger generations.
Education is one, and then the biggest for me is data collection. So right now, we've subsidized for the last 50 years. I always say, like, we've had subsidies that paid farmers to grow cheap calories, and they got awesome at growing cheap calories.
Yep.
And insurance systems were set up to make sure that those
Yep.
cheap calories kept rolling and rolling. But now we all kind of see what the effects are on our environment, on our health. And there's enough of the population right now that would probably rather pay farmers to actually grow healthy ecosystems
Right.
than cheap calories. But cheap calories are easy to measure. It's like, bring it to the scale, there it is. Like,
Yep.
how can you actually measure an ecosystem moving forward? And they talk about carbon sequestration, and most of that data is even just taking the soil sample, looking at the organic matter, and then getting your carbon value from that. And that's just a one time a year. Is that an ecosystem improving or
Right.
not? So one of the things that we're launching with our conservation plan is actually this data collection program, that as we do these different practices, we're putting in a compost facility, using fencing to move our sheep around, and rotational grazing.
Uh-huh.
We're putting in the hedgerows, we're planting pollinator forage habitat
Yep.
around the fields. And we're layering all these things, and we're also over time going to start collecting specific ecosystem data from
Yeah.
these different parts, different activities.
Yeah.
So over time, doing this on this farm and a number of other farms around this area, we can start getting that database. Be like, okay, here's the numbers of when the
Yes.
ecosystem's moving forward, and the infiltration rates are
Yes.
increasing every year, where we're seeing more diversity every year, where we have the carbon being sequestered every year. And once we have hard numbers on that, we can start talking about subsidies.
Yep.
But right now, no one's been working on
Right.
gathering those numbers.
And I think that's really important to point out is you're talking about outcome-based
Mhm.
testing, which is showing you're actually doing these practices and year over year it's improving.
Right.
Whereas like organic or some of these other certifications, it's like a checklist and it's
Right.
easy to loophole.
Yeah.
So I think that's super important, because it's like you can do the soil, you can show how many different kinds of pollinators are this year, and then next year you've got more. And yeah,
Exactly. I think people want food because they know if the ecosystem is improving, then the nutrition and
Yes.
flavor of the food's going to be there.
Yep.
It's a challenge to get everything rolling, and it's hard. Typically, like land grant universities are the ones that do research and roll out policy, and they're
Right.
great at like studying a magic seed, a magic chemical, a magic this. But we're talking here about ecosystem
Yes.
management, which is a whole different ballgame. There's just not that kind of holistic thinking going on
No.
at land grant universities at all.
Right.
And so what I see is it's happening on small farms, and it's farmers working together. There's a lot of scientists here in Boulder County where we're at that are getting involved and donating their time. NOAA gave us a weather station to use, so we'll have above ground weather readings with rainfall, wind, and from there we're going to have sensors going into the soil
Yeah.
and measuring carbon dioxide in the soil, the humidity level, temperatures in the soil, and be able to
Amount of
map
water,
that over time.
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when you have that real-time data, which is for the first time becoming
Yep.
available in agriculture, you can see how we respond to like a heavy rain event or
Yep.
a heavy drought event, and
Yep.
start using that information to be like, okay, these practices
Yeah.
are making us more climate proof. At
Yeah.
the end, it's all about climate proofing our lands and holding on to what we can, because it's not going to get any like less rocky in
Yeah.
the next 2 decades.
It's kind of like this balance of climate proofing, but also trying to do things that are going to help with that. So it's like a weird transition.
Yeah, and doing things that are going to actually pay the bills while you're doing
right.
that.
That too, right.
So you have to balance the economics and the whole piece of it.
Mhm.
It's a challenge, but it's fun.
But to have like data that shows the water infiltration rate here and how much you can hold on this land compared to a conventional one nearby, that's a perfect comparison when they've got all their topsoil going down the river.
That's the information
Yep.
we need.
Yep, exactly. I love that. And you're starting that this year?
We're piloting a program out here this
Okay.
summer.
Awesome. That's so cool. Yay.
I want to say something.
Yeah.
So all these things are happening in our land, but also in open space.
Yes.
So open space is not even our land, and why we're doing it there, because we care,
Mm-hmm.
and we need, in order to change of this, we need people that really believe.
Yep.
That they believe that this is the solution for the future.
Yeah.
So we are getting help from people that they do believe in it.
Right.
So a lot of people ask us, why you are doing this in open space? I
Right.
mean, it's not even your land.
Right.
Well, because we care.
Right.
And what we need is people who are behind these open space places. They need to really believe, and they really need to start taking action
Right.
about that land.
Yep.
That is everybody's land.
Yes.
And they need to have more conscience about the future, and they really need to start helping
Right. Yeah, and understanding this
and
versus the other
understanding
system.
what it has to be.
Right.
And that's another page of the story,
Right.
but really create that conscience, or have people who take decisions that they really believe
Yep.
that is not just growing something on the land, it's
Right.
regenerating, caring about the land, bring it back to life.
Yep.
And we need people with more conscience in that.
So education, even on that adult level, is
Yeah, education and adult level.
yeah. Everybody needs to be educated.
Everybody needs to be educated.
Exactly.